Some people have bought into homeowners associations and they don't really know what they actually bought into. And so they think they bought a house and they don't realize that they're actually signing on to contribute a share of everyone's property. This is a community effort, and sometimes we have to weigh the needs of the many versus the needs of the individual. And so I really want to try to keep that ball rolling for Cobblestone.
Common Sense for Common Areas exists to help all 2 million HOA board members nationwide have the right information at the right time to make the right decisions for their future. If you're a board member, that's you. Stay with us weekly for actionable insights that minimize stress, avoid catastrophes, and protect your property values. This episode is sponsored by 3 businesses that care about volunteer board members: Association Reserves, Community Financials, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Thankless shop. What comes to your mind when you hear those 2 words? Having served on the board of my condominium association for a few years and then followed by decades of experience in this industry, there is one job that without a doubt deserves to be at the top of the list: an elected volunteer community association board member. So, a regular feature of our weekly podcast is a once-a-month episode devoted to sharing the stories of real-life unsung board heroes. In our eyes, a board hero is one of the 2 million elected volunteers who are worthy of recognition for simply performing a thankless job well. We hope these stories will affirm the value and importance of a board that takes their responsibility seriously and inspire and motivate board members across the country to keep up the good work.
My name is Zac Perry. I am the current board president for the Cobblestone Owners Association. We are an association of 157 owners. I have served on that board for 1 year now. I was just reelected.
Cobblestone Owners Association is located in Urbandale, Iowa, just outside of Des Moines. The property is approximately 35 years old, and because their bylaws prohibit rentals, it's 100% owner-occupied. Zillow estimates the value of a unit at Cobblestone to be between $200,000 and $300,000. We asked Zac what first motivated him to become involved in the governance of his association.
We started to undergo a sort of board culture change with the last iteration of the board. And we hired a professional property manager, and then we needed to do a reserve study. And so we formed a reserve study committee. And so I volunteered for that committee, having no idea what I was getting into. Thought, well, I've been living here for 6 or 5 years and thought, well, I should help out. And so I decided to get involved with the reserve study process, learned a lot about what was going on and what needed to be done in our community. And so when the opportunity came to run for an at-large position, I thought, well, I'll give this a go for a year and see what happens. And so now it's been a year since that. And so we're 2 years in, reserve study for a year, board member for a year so far, and still going on. And so I ran and got on the board.
Cobblestone was built in 5 phases with bylaws that called from 1 board member for each phase plus 2 members at large. That's a total of 7 board positions. We were curious to learn about Zac's personality and what special gifts he brought to the board.
I'm a pretty driven individual. I'm early to rise type of person, try to get as much done as I can. When possible, I like to be a little laid back and a little more joking. There's definitely some snarkiness and sarcasm that can come across when we're having conversations. But then, I do tend to be able to dial that back down when I'm conducting a board meeting or things like that. But you do have to keep it kind of friendly when you're in a volunteer position. I think working with many, many homeowners. Well, I do have a little bit of a disorganization tendency, but I think that almost helps because I'm always thinking of different avenues to deal with the problems that we're facing as a board or as an association, whether it be about work or the board, or, I'm thinking about how are we going to, solve a problem, 3, 4, 5 years down the road and really working toward that. But I think that's probably my biggest strength that I bring to the board.
In a post-COVID world, we wondered how the board was meeting and what the meetings were like.
We meet virtual on Zoom. We have not gone back to in person for a few different reasons. One, we've had better attendance on Zoom than we ever had ever in the past. I mean, we were up to at one point, nearly 2/3 of our association was attending, and even in the winter, and so it's in Iowa, it's dark and cold in the winter by the time board meetings would happen at 7 p.m. And so virtual is so easy. I can finish work, log on my computer, all my board members are there. Any owners who want to be there are there. It helps with code of conduct, with owners forums. It makes sure that when we're conducting the business of the board, that we can allow owners to watch and be aware of what's going on, but we don't necessarily have to deal with the untimely interruptions and things like that.
As you heard, Zac's path to his current role as board president was a years-long journey that involved several smaller roles. And during that time, Zac became aware of what he refers to as a profound financial problem.
What's motivating me to stay on the board is the desire I have. I usually want to finish a project. When I started, I want to make sure that it gets done. I want to make sure it gets done right. When I was on the Reserve Study Committee, we uncovered a profound problem in Cobblestone. I mean, we were 4% funded, and we had $7 million of depreciated physical plant that we needed to fix. And so we're well on our way to helping to solve that. But I really want to make sure we see this through and we take care of the community and really change the culture of how people think about being in an association and making sure that they know that this is a community effort, and sometimes we have to weigh the needs of the many versus the needs of the individual. And so I really want to try to keep that ball rolling for Cobblestone.
Full disclosure, Cobblestone Owners Association has been a client of my company, Association Reserves, for several years. But since our services are engaged through their manager, this is actually the first time we are getting Zac's perspective on the work we do. To get a sense of how big an impact being 4% funded had on the association, we asked Zac for more details about the budget.
So currently, to help fix our results of our reserve study being 4% funded, we worked really hard over the last year. I think we're up to like 16% funded now, but we are practicing austerity measures on operations to really try to help out with that. And so we're running about $350,000 a year for our annual budget.
As a reserve specialist, it's not uncommon for us to deliver bad news to our clients, but we're not always privy to how a board decides to respond to the reserve study results.
Our board's current focus right now is to work to improving essentially the results of the reserve study. And so when we had our reserve study done, again, we found that pretty much the majority of our exterior components were all at the end of their useful life or beyond, and they were all in need of replacement essentially yesterday. We had 120 some active roof leaks. And so the focus of the board really is to restore the physical plant of the association, and that's the roofs, the sidings, gutters, and all that. And that alone sort of resets the depreciation clock, which will improve our reserve percent funded. We're working toward getting our reserves to where they need to be so that we can continue to function well and into the future and not have to go through the hardships that we've had to go through the last couple of years.
An effective board must work as a team. Here's how Zac describes the culture of the Cobblestone board.
Culturally, what we're trying to do with our board is really reestablish the idea of a professional board that understands fiduciary duty and all the components that go with that. It understands that when you're on a board, you have to change your hat from homeowner to a board that's looking at how do we protect the interests of the entire community. And that's been a little bit of a struggle for some of our board members, but they've definitely come around, and really we worked hard on that. We went through a really big struggle in our community to increase dues to a level that will help us get to a better position financially, as well as fund our projects to restore the physical plant. And so we've gotten that done. Now we're about 4 or 5 months out of that. So things are going a lot better financially. And so we have, as a board, become a little more relaxed there, but we're still working hard to make sure we're looking at fiduciary duty, running our meetings with Robert's rules, and really following, bylaws and the governing documents there.
Learning that Cobblestone was only 4% funded was a shock for the board and ultimately a shock for all the other owners. We asked Zac to describe the process of passing a special assessment and raising assessments. That
was 18 months of work, extending from the original reserve study to its dissemination to the community, what the situation we were in. I mean, we as a community went through all of the stages that you go through when you're talking about bad news. There was denial, huge denial. There was anger, resentment. I don't think we really got to acceptance until about a month ago. And that was even after we'd passed the increase. But I probably put in easy 200 hours of volunteer work in 4 months to try to just continually work on that. We had in our community in particular, and I say this to encourage other boards that might have to go through this, you will have owners that will misunderstand the bylaws, misquote them. We had one guy, he said he had a way to do it for way less money. And we had to deal with like an anti-reserve study campaign. And so all of that is there. But in the end, when you get what you need to get past and you start to improve the financial and physical health of your association, it'll feel like Christmas every single day, especially when you start working on the projects there. I mean, you see the funds coming in, but we started our roofing project 2 weeks ago. And every time you walk in, you're like pumping your fists, like all that was worth it because everybody's going to get their homes are going to be taken care of. You're looking after your neighbors, and it's really worth it in the end. So if you're struggling with that, keep up the fight.
When we asked Zac about his favorite and least favorite aspects about serving on the board, this is how he responded.
Favorite aspect of serving on the board, I think it's being informed. I mean, really, like when you're on the board, you are informed of every little nook, cranny, everything that goes on with your association, both the good and the bad. So you really get to work on that. And it's also been a huge growing experience for me. Like when I jokingly say that I ascended to the presidency, when the previous president resigned, I was kind of wondering, am I really ready to take this on? Because I'd never served on an association board before. I'd been on another nonprofit board, but not anything near this complex. And so I was not quite sure, but I do like the challenge of being on the board and the personal growth that it has provided me. My least favorite aspect, well, some people have bought into homeowners associations and they don't really know what they actually bought into. And so they think they bought a house and then, I get my lawn mowed or my snow shovel. And they don't realize that they're actually signing on to contribute a share of everyone's property. And so that's sometimes teaching them that, and that can be a bit of a challenge.
As in any elected position, board members can leave a legacy that affects future boards. It's clear that Zac is proud of what the current board has accomplished. We're curious to know whether the prior board had set Zac's board up for success or failure.
The immediately prior board, I would say, set me up for success by starting this whole process. I mean, the previous board, they started the hiring of the property manager. They ordered the reserve study. They really started they were rubbing the sticks together to start the fire of this culture change within Cobblestone. And so they set me up there for that. The one thing I would say that may have set me up for failure, and I think it actually ended up turning into a setup for success, was I joined the board and I was a novice. And then we had one board meeting, and then the president kind of disappeared a little bit. And then he resigned, and he had his very personal reasons for doing that. I don't blame him or any bad ill will or anything like that. And when that happened, I had no idea what I was doing. And so sometimes that can be overwhelming when that happens. For me, it was more of like, here's some fire. Let's light it under you. And then I just took the ball, ran with it as, full tilt, head down. And so it ended up being successful that way. But I fortunately have 6 other board members that are really supportive and really competent and to help me out with all of that.
Based on our experience, about 80% of association-governed communities are professionally managed. That leaves 20% that are self-managed. We asked Zac about the decision the Cobblestone Board made regarding the management of their association.
So our property is professionally managed. We use West Property Management, which is operated by Jeff Westendorf. Jeff was the manager that we selected after an extensive RFP and interview process. We specifically chose him because he had experience with reserve studies and developing long-term financial planning for associations. as well as managing the restoration of associations that were in a state of depreciation like ours was. He's given us quite a bit of service and really done a great job.
But even the best manager on the planet can't perform their job well if they're hampered by a dysfunctional board of directors. Here's what Zac had to say about the culture of the current Cobblestone board.
As far as our thought processes as a board, we are pretty consistent now. We've had a little bit of turnover over the last 18 months or so, and we really have seen the people who have stepped up and decided to be of service on our board. They really have embraced this idea of fiduciary responsibility and making sure that they understand what their role is on a board, making sure that they're not, breaking any best practice rules and things like that.
We asked Zac about how the external world is changing in ways that may or may not be reflected in the board meeting conversations.
The external world, we're dealing with, trying to understand the realities of inflation and how that's affecting our percent funded, trying to understand how that's affecting project costs, things like that. When we were looking at our reserve study and saying, okay, how much are we going to need to replace our roofs? Well, we shared that information with the community, and several people who had been in construction and retired for 20 years, they're like, there's no way roofs cost that much. And I was like, well, have you been to Home Depot lately? Because a sheet of ply was like $70. In our board discussions, had to address that and really work on an education campaign to say, yes, roofs do cost this much. We got 7 quotes to say this is how much this actually costs as part of our reserve study process. And so we really did vet these numbers. The reserve study is correct, and this is how much it's going to cost, and this is how we need to work to raise money to do that. So I would say that reflects the external world. And its changes and how it affects our association. In the external world, I think a lot of people aren't dealing with managing 157 homes. So our board conversations, they might not, it's almost like a different type of kitchen table conversation you might have with your spouse. At the end of the day, okay, well, we need a roof. So how are we gonna work on that? Well, we might go get a second mortgage. Well, in an association, you're having a board conversation and you're saying, well, we probably need new roofs there because they're all leaking. How are we going to pay for that? And then you have to get 156 other buy-ins to say that, oh yeah, we agree with how you want to pay for that. And then also work around, the people say, well, my roof's not leaking. And then deal with the culture change of saying, yes, your roof's not leaking, but because you live in an association, you are responsible for a fraction of your neighbor's roof. And we need to look after your neighbor as well.
It was clear to us that Zac had gained a lot of wisdom and experience over the years. He's been actively involved in governing his association. So our final question to Zac was about the advice he would give to someone considering serving on the board.
So advice for someone who might be considering joining the board, I would say definitely go for it. You might be surprised with the challenges you face, but also the growth that you'll go through. You'll get to meet lots of good neighbors. You'll really get connected with your community. And if you're worried about not knowing how to do it, don't worry so much about that. Everyone on the board is a volunteer. No one starts out as an expert. If you're looking for information on fiduciary duty and you want to know more about that, there are association-specific lawyers who have great presentations on YouTube about that. If you're worried about the finances in your association, you can look up reservestudy.com and check them out. I think the link's on there, direct you there, but you'll learn a ton about reserve studies, what percent funded means, things like that. So don't worry about not knowing all this stuff. The manager will help you out. YouTube will help you out, and you can look up all that stuff. So my recommendation or advice would be do it and see what comes out. And even if you don't think you have the time for it, you can also participate in your association on various committees and things like that. But I would definitely encourage you to try working on the board.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Zac, for performing a thankless job well. Kudos to the entire board of directors at Cobblestone Owners Association in Urbandale, Iowa, for taking their responsibility seriously to act in the best interest of the association.
You've been listening to Common Sense for Common Areas. Thank you to each of you for your engagement and support. To continue the conversation, you can follow the social media links for Robert Nordland, Kevin Davis, and Julie Adaman in the show notes. If you like the show and would like to support us, you can do so in a number of ways. You can subscribe to Common Sense for Common Areas wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and please share it with another board member. You can do us a huge favor by going to iTunes and leaving us a 5-star rating and review. And you can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. You'll find links to the website and social media for Association Reserves, Community Financials, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services in the show notes. But the most important thing you can do is to engage in the conversation. You can email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or call our 24/7 voicemail line at 805-203-3130. This podcast was produced by Stokelight Video Production and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll see sales grow as you reach more customers with videos that inspire action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight. Finally, remember that the views and opinions expressed by the podcast, including host, co-host, and guests, do not constitute legal advice. We encourage our audience to consult with their own legal counsel before making important decisions.